Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and Digital.ai. My name is Cody J. Brown, the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead of us, but first I have a couple of housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live webinar today. If you have any questions, we want you to direct those to the Q&A tab. And we also want you to be active in our chat tab. So if you have any comments or anything to add to our conversation, that's where we want you to direct those. Finally, at the conclusion of our webinar, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Our topic today is State of DORA Metrics and AI, and I'm joined today by Tina Sturgis, Senior Director of Product and Solutions Marketing at Digital.ai, Daniel Kirsch, Managing Director and Co-founder of Techstrong Research, and Mitch Ashley, Principal of Techstrong Research. And it's my pleasure at this point in time to turn the floor over to Mitch to get us started. But thank you, all three of you, for being here with me today.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cody. Appreciate you kicking things off for us here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have a great platform for our conversation today. We're going to be sharing some interesting data with you and also adding some insights to that. And this is some kind of flash poll research that Techstrong Research, analyst firm that both Dan and I are part of. So we'll get to that content in a moment. I want to take it just to give a little bit of an opportunity for Tina and Dan to introduce themselves. I guess I'll start by saying I'm principal with Techstrong Research, and I also serve as CTO with the broader company, Techstrong Group, and come to the conversation both as a practitioner and product creator, and now add to that analyst perspective. So, Tina, will you share with us a little bit about yourself and a little bit more about Digital.ai? And by the way, thank you very much to Digital.ai for sponsoring our webinar today.
Yeah, super exciting. So I'll start with myself. I'll do a small brief intro and then we'll go into a little commercial around Digital.ai and then hopefully jump into the meat and potatoes for the webinar today. So Tina Sturgis, I'm the Senior Director of Product and Solution Marketing here at Digital.ai. I've been here about 3 months, but don't worry, I've been in and around DevOps, software development life cycle for over 20 years. So this, DORA metrics and really having metrics and KPIs and actually foundational levels of those metrics in place is so important as companies go through digital transformations, as they go to their next, version of DevOps, maybe they're heading toward value stream management, etc. Super important concepts, right, to have. Digital.ai. So you may or may not know Digital.ai about 2 years ago, almost to the day. We were 5 companies that came together as one. Fortunately or unfortunately for us, it was the beginning of the pandemic. So Digital.ai has been an amazing grouping of, best in class products in and around DevOps. We essentially are, we have so many customers. I think it's like 1,500 plus global enterprise customers. We cover about 50% of the Fortune 500 in our customer base. What do? So we enable technology-driven enterprises to accelerate their digital transformation with our AI-powered DevOps platform. You'll note the AI piece, which we'll have lots and lots of conversations today about. That's it. I'll turn it back over to you, Mitch. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Tina. Dan, great. How about you introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit more about Techstrong Research too?
Yes, I'm Dan Kirsch, Managing Director of Techstrong Research. We're an analyst research and consulting firm, focus a lot on DevOps, cloud native, AI and data, and then supporting infrastructure around that. So I'm going to just jump into the work that we did for this. So in March, so last month, we ran a number of flash polls across our membership. Our membership includes folks interested in DevOps, security, digital transformation, and cloud native development. And what we really wanted to understand is the importance of gathering data around your DevOps and engineering efforts, and then where companies are in their life cycle of infusing AI and ML into the DevOps process, and sort of what the future is in terms of how you feel AI and ML can positively impact your DevOps efforts. So across all these polls, we had more than 450 participants, which is great. And I think that's indicative of the enthusiasm around trying to get more data and measurements around DevOps and engineering.
Excellent too. And I'll share my screen here. And one of the outcomes of this, and we're going to be referring to this document throughout our webinar today, so you'll see me share that screen on occasion, is a lot of this research shows up in a document we call a pulse meter, which has some really good stats. You want to talk about the pulse meter and kind of the vehicle with the purpose of that, Dan?
Yeah, so the pulse meter is, so I mentioned we get a number of these flash polls. We then put together a 2-page report. So the intention of this report is, quickly see what your peers are doing in the market, what their opinions are. This isn't sort of a state of AI, ML, and DevOps. Instead, this is really quick research so that you can see what companies are doing and what their outlook is on DORA, on metrics, DORA and other metrics, along with AI and ML for DevOps.
Great.
And it's available in the, if you click on the handouts button, it's available there.
Thank you. I was just going to say that too. Well, great. And this will be sent to everyone who were registered, both people in attendance as well as those who were not able to join. So everybody will get a free copy of this also. So sit back and relax, take a few notes if you want, just hang in there, join the conversation. But I do want to encourage everyone, please join in on chat. This isn't just us talking. We would love to hear your thoughts. They're like, hey, that's really interesting. Or, hey, I'm not sure if I believe that. I have a different perspective, or my experience is this, or what about this? What's the panel think of this question? You can put that in the questions and comments in the chat. You can put it in Q&A, but we're not that formal here. It doesn't have to go in Q&A. Just toss your thoughts into a chat message, and we'll be happy to include that and help that shape and guide our conversation. So while I've still got the screen open and shared, why don't we go to this first piece of data? And we're going to cover everything in this report. There's some other good stats, and we'll kind of show it to you a little bit. There's a little bit of a teaser you can download and look at it. But when we talk about this first question around using DORA metrics, Dan.
Yeah, so I mean, ML AI is great, but you really need some sort of data to level set where you are and where you want to go. So whether that's DORA metrics, other KPIs, other pieces of data. So obviously DORA metrics are, I don't want to say standardized, but they're the most adopted and something that most DevOps organizations are familiar with. So we asked the audience or our membership, do you use DORA metrics? And what we found is over 50% either said they live by DORA metrics. That was about 15%. Another 40% said that DORA metrics are helpful. So, it was interesting because you might think it would be higher because we're talking about DORA metrics all the time, but there are other measurements and KPIs that folks are using as well.
It's interesting in just talking about this too. I'm interested, Tina, your experience. It seems like you either know a lot about DORA metrics, heard of them, know there's sort of a de facto set of metrics that people use, or maybe haven't heard of them. There's a lot of people new to DevOps that weren't around when DORA first started coming to be, but it still is here. It's got lasting power and staying power.
Yeah, you know what I will tell you about DORA is I loved when we started to really standardize and really talk about how all of those metrics come together. It was really the first time in DevOps and even beyond that software development lifecycle that we said, okay, these are the key ones that you're going to want to focus in on. I also feel like companies and organizations, actually saying, yes, I'm all in on DORA metrics is really going to be very dependent on their level of maturity in and around DevOps, right? Lots of organizations are changing, especially in these last couple of years. We had to change really fast. So, metrics sometimes fall to the bottom, even though we know that they're really important for us to really understand, number one, what is the baseline, and then go through, an application for software development, and then figure out how did we do. But sometimes it goes by the wayside. So I think that DORA has been great for us. People can go to it, they can get a lot of information, but I still think at the end of the day, it's something that Digital.ai calls predictive insights. We still need to answer real questions, right? Like, can we predict which changes will fail ahead of time, right? There's not a specific exact DORA metric that does that. It's really about the analytics of all of the data and the accumulation of the data, which is something that actually, one of the main reasons why I joined after being in and around DevOps for so long, one of the reasons why I joined Digital.ai is because we have this analytics and AI and ML capabilities that help with DORA metrics, and then actually take you, 5-6 steps further in and around those KPIs you talked about a little bit earlier, Dan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of folks who really understand DevOps, they understand the DORA metrics, but if you look at it, it's all backward facing. So you can have a really cool dashboard that shows, lead time for changes and your change failure rate. But what are you really going to do with that? I mean, it might be great for managers to be able to look at different DevOps teams, sort of figure out why is this team doing so much better than another team, and sort of figure out some best practices. But it's hard to sort of take a proactive stance when you're looking at what were last week's DORA metrics or last month or last quarter. Sort of
exactly.
Data is cool, but it's all about what you do with the data.
Absolutely. I think it's a lot of fun. Within our analytics, we have this thing called change risk prediction, and it's a nice dashboard that allows folks to kind of see what's going on. And we had like a very large commercial bank that I can't name, unfortunately, but basically they were struggling with the lack of visibility and operational efficiencies, which were impacting them, right? So what did they do? So as they came to us, we basically were able to, give them visibility into, some of these metrics around change. Because I would say that change is probably the biggest one, right? We all have change as we're going through, and we need to look backwards to see what happened. And we also need, to be able to forecast out that future and predict the future. And that's really where that AI and ML, I know I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit there with this conversation, but that's really where the AI and the ML components come in, because it's a great look back as we are predicting or forecasting the future. And this particular bank, basically after implementing, was able to gain better visibility and transparency, fewer change failures, resulting in better flows, right? Better iterations, faster, increasing IT staff and leadership productivity, which is huge in today's day and age. We all are asked to do more with less budget. So being more productive is obviously a huge benefit to everyone. And then really making data-driven decisions, better quality data gives us better decision-making opportunities as leadership, as managers, and even as, your individual contributors throughout that software development lifecycle.
There's some interesting questions that are flowing and conversation flowing
Awesome.
already in the chat. Appreciate everybody doing that. This particular question was asking about deployment, certain metrics, deployment frequency, lead time for changes, mean time to recovery, and change failure rate, many of which you mentioned too, Tina. There's a couple of points in the conversation happening. One is it can be a heavy lift for some organizations to get to that point where they've got the data, or at least on a regular, frequent enough basis across whatever breadth they have to deal with, to be able to truly measure it, to make it meaningful. So it isn't just a simple, let's pull these stats off of whatever monitoring tool and we're done. Sometimes there's a lift to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see that. Did you look at the Mahesh said for the 86 that did not say they live by DORA? I actually see this as almost like a 50-50. when I read this data. I think everybody interprets data. I think those 41%, which is a good bulk of that that number as we surveyed here, they find them helpful because it helps guide them. Again, they may not be using it standard out of the box like we talked about earlier because the level of maturity, but it gives them guideposts so that they can learn how to do things better, related to change or maybe workflow accelerations, et cetera, et cetera. Is it mainly homegrown custom metrics? Yeah, I think it's, I wouldn't say homegrown. I think there's lots of information out there around metrics that you can gather. Like I said, asking the right questions. Can we predict which changes will fail ahead of time? That's really great. Like, how do we do that? Let's take a look into those areas within the software development lifecycle and figure out, can we answer these questions? The data is there. It's just getting to the data, I think, has been the hardest part historically. Because there's not a ton of, your typical DevOps solutions that have this sort of dashboarding capabilities out of the box. One of the acquisitions that Digital.ai had, already was doing this for years. It was called Numerify, that one of the 5 purchases that we made. And they, have lots of very large customers who are using those. We now have transferred into something that we call a lens, an analytical lens, because it really gives you that focus into those areas that you need to kind of focus in on. Again, may not be exact DORA metric, but it's definitely something that helps you move your business, increase your cycle times, from a workflow perspective, making things go faster from an iteration standpoint, and, ensuring quality.
Yeah, and I think some of the problem is also normalizing the data. I mean,
for sure.
Right around the DevOps tool chain, there's so many different tools that your developers are using different tools than testers, excuse me, and along with the QA team. So everyone's using different tools, and so it's impossible. It's great, the idea that could everyone use the same platform potentially, but you're not going to do that. So instead, what the DORA metrics help is sort of, how can we normalize all of these different the data coming off of these different development platforms, because there isn't a standardized set of DevOps data.
No, I think that's extremely accurate, right? Like, and again, although I'm a software vendor, I still wouldn't want to make that decision to rip and replace a current investment, right? It's working, right? So say, for instance, you already have something for testing, or maybe you already have something for your CI process, your build, source code management, whatever it is, you have it, right? It's working. You're just not extracting that data out of it. I think that's, really the key is, I think the idea of a full one-stop shop platform in DevOps is definitely an interesting concept. I'm just not sure that companies can do that because the investments they've made and, the training and all of the things that go along with ripping and replacing.
Yeah, I wouldn't even look at it from a financial investment. Obviously, that's a big part of it, but it's also, every person in your DevOps organization is a highly skilled professional who's comfortable on the platforms they like, and to say, we're all moving to this standardized platform, throws out an awful lot of their experience and knowledge around certain tools, and for what end. So that's why I think layering on top, visibility is important rather than sort of rip and replace the piping.
Absolutely.
I want to get to the .ai part of this.
Okay. I'm happy to talk about that.
I kind of figured you would be, and I know Dan will be as well. Let's take a look at another one of the questions that we asked.
Sure.
Around machine learning. And of course, we've been talking about all the data that goes in and involved. And of course, guess what? Machine learning is a data eating engine, right?
For sure.
So it's a really good application for that. So we asked, how do you think about machine learning and how that helps DevOps processes? Dan, you want to share a little bit on the data and maybe some insights on this?
Yeah. So I mean, my general feeling is there's so much data DevOps data out there, and like we were just talking about, there's not standardized data, and it's a constant flow that you really need automation, AI, and ML to make sense of the data. Otherwise, you're just going to look at some dashboards, but you're not going to really be able to take a proactive stance. So we wanted to know how people think ML and AI can impact their DevOps process, and a few common things people point to is reducing outages and increasing employee efficiency. The reality is people have really high expectations when it comes to
they do
AI, and we're not at sort of this all-encompassing panacea of AI, but people expect AI to help them in all of their pain points. I mean, there's a lot of pain points with DevOps, and they expect AI to be able to help them in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, so lots to unpack with that. So kind of by definition, right? So let's just make sure everybody is on the same page around AI and machine learning, right? So, machine learning is basically an AI technique, right? I actually think it's one of the most powerful analytics techniques that you can have out there. I think it, allows you to leverage that historical data input wherever it's stored. And looks at, sort of the current day signals that are happening in today's, workflows and pipelines, et cetera, to help you deliver, a better result. Over time, these models obviously get better and better. The more data and the more flows and more times you get through this, it's going to learn a lot more, right? And you're going to figure out, and you're going to be able to forecast, bottlenecks, et cetera. I think that, what I love about this stat here is, and it sort of is frustrating because I'd like to know more, is, all of the above. Like you said, it's like we think we can solve all of our problems with machine learning. And I do believe a lot of our very, very large customers that have implemented, our areas like workflow acceleration and change risk prediction, have seen a tremendous amount of benefits and value to their organization. And it helps them improve and reduce lead times, detect and eliminate bottlenecks, improve predictability. I think the predictability for me is one of my most favorite because, as humans, we can all have a gut feel. And I can look at something and I can say, wow, I really think that, I think there might be a problem when we pass this over to QA in this area. What a machine learning AI solution will allow you to do is take that gut feel that you have as the human and take it to the next level and say, heck, you're going to have this bottleneck at this level within your pipeline. And, let's talk about that now while we're still building before we get to the testing phase.
Yeah, I think, Tina, you're touching on an area that's near and dear to my heart, which is augmented intelligence. So the way I view this is, there's certain AI activities where the system can automatically do things, check the report is open and things like that, help with ETL, all sorts of things.
Right.
But really where we are is AI and ML is helping people work more efficiently. So number one, the ML system can help you figure out, what's normal, and then help you sort of, something's wrong here.
Yep.
And then it can kick it to a human to also say, we're seeing some signals, and the human might know, gee, we're onboarding this company we just acquired. That's what's going on.
Yep.
Or we've got a big problem here. And so it really lets humans sort of react better and more efficiently, because at the end of the day, people have the ability to understand context and things like that, whereas the ML can really just understand massive amounts of data that is impossible for a human to ingest and remember forever.
Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sylvia is pointing out in the audience that the correlation is one of the hardest challenges, right? Because that takes understanding of the data and tying it together, and then what does all that mean? So none of those are simple steps.
Yeah, it's again, predictive modeling is one thing, and then having correlation and identifying more and more of those relevant and actionable correlations is a huge piece of what we do at Digital.ai as well. Ensuring that it's not just that prediction; it is also things that are somewhat related, right? Somewhat correlated. So.
I'm curious, Tina, if is there, let me bring this stat back up so we can look at that. Do any of these stand out to you? I know 75% said, yeah, we'd like everything. We were
I
hoping
know.
a lot of stuff.
Again, I laughed, good and bad, right? I want more information, but that's all right.
Just like, would you like a yellow or a red Lamborghini? I'll
I
take
want them
both.
all.
Let me have both. So do any of those first three stand out as something you hear more frequently than others? Or is that what you hear? Most people have like a wide range of expectations they're hoping machine learning will assist with.
I think I would say, I'll start with our customer base. I think a lot of them is, I wouldn't say is the ultimate goal would be, hey, I want to reduce my outage, but I think their questions are more related to, where are those bottlenecks going to be that's going to reduce my outage, right? Like, I think it's much further upstream, the questions that they're looking to have answered than the ultimate result of reducing an outage. So I would say, these are pretty, for me, a little generic in nature. I'd like to look at can we identify those bottlenecks and to reduce that lead time. Can we forecast when those outages will happen? We're obviously increasing efficiency. Anytime you do some kind of automation, you're going to increase efficiencies, but there are different facets in different areas that you can increase those efficiencies. So it's kind of, I hate to say it, it's all over the map, but I think the questions that I see most often in our customer base are much further upstream, more tactical questions, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, when we're working with clients, we see it really maps to what the business pain is. So these days some of the biggest business pains are, we don't need to come out with research to know that the Great Resignation is underway. There's an employee shortage, so obviously improving employee efficiency is huge, making it easier for employees, improving the customer experience, another huge thing that businesses are focused on. And then obviously there's cost reduction.
Right.
So those are sort of huge business priorities, and we see that's why companies want to bring in AI solutions.
Exactly.
One of the things running development teams or organization, there's always this dilemma of, are we in the tool business or are we in the software creation business? You end up spending so much time building the frameworks, integrating everything together. Tell me if this is true, Tina. I suspect one of the value props for digital AI is let's accelerate and reduce the burden you might have on an organization of putting a lot of that together to start to pull those metrics. Yes, you have to feed the data in and tie the sources together, but you don't have to build all of it. You can get a big head start.
Yeah, that's, a lot of I'm looking at some stats right here just to kind of give you a little bit, a Fortune 20 healthcare leader, was able to decrease their IT change related problems by 64% with implementing our change risk prediction, analytics up on top. Also, let's see, I have a Fortune 500 CPG leader, annual savings, $1 million+ from reduced change failure rates. A lot of our customers seem to, there's two main areas. We have 4 major offerings around our data and analytics. And then within each module of our software, we have, dashboards and analytics that allow you to have all of these metrics, naturally in that particular module. So if it's agile, scaling agile, or if it's release and deploy, or if it's application protection, quality assurance on the continuous testing side. We have all of those dashboards as well, but a lot of our key areas that we focus in on at the very, larger enterprise customers, I would say, is workflow acceleration, making sure things are going faster, watching that, and then the change risk predictions, because those are the two keys that we have seen to date that really do impact all of those outcomes. The reducing outages, all of those things that we saw in that report. Those are the two that really focus in on, those outcomes that people are looking for ultimately.
They say when you say something important to repeat it. Say that again. What are those two things that lead to that?
It is, I'll say it slow. We call them, it's sort of a bundled offering, if you will. It's workflow acceleration and change risk prediction.
Great.
Those
Can
are
you
the
put a
two.
little more meat on the bone? What does workflow
Oh,
acceleration mean and change risk mean?
sure. So workflow acceleration really is identifying, and removing the bottlenecks across the pipelines of the workflows that go on, from the beginning and plan and defined all the way through to production. I know that's generic. I'd show you a bunch of slides if I could show slides, but I can't. But at the end of the day, it really is about, just removing those bottlenecks and predicting the ability to predict them, pinpointing the non-value add activities that are happening that consume up resources is another big one that we can show. And then standardizing and streamlining, things like release and deploy processes. Because that's just going to expedite those, overarching workflows for you.
But really simply, it's less work, more flow.
Yeah, exactly. And, identifying stuff that's happening. Sometimes it happens, right? There's stuff that goes on that is stopping that flow from happening, and we don't have any insights into what that is. And this kind of breaks that open and kind of peels back that onion so you can start to see where those, non-value add things are happening, so you can, work on it. And again, some non-value add things have to happen. It just is what it is, right? But at the end of the day, you can identify them and make some good business decisions on how you're going to fix that.
And you also mentioned change risk.
Change risk is, it's very, very comprehensive solution for us. You can look at things like the high cost of IT change failure. So you can look at how much it's costing you for those failures, make sense of constantly evolving IT environments, establish IT change team metrics. Like, what are your metrics? What are those baselines? You can also do what we call score IT change credit worthiness, like give yourself a score and start to really understand the productivity of idle change management processes in and across your business. And then analyze both upstream and downstream IT change impact on the organization. And then obviously the prediction part of the change risk is a huge piece to the change risk prediction offering that we have.
Dan, it seems to me too that this also feeds really nicely into a SRE, site reliability engineering concept of risk budgets, right? And how much can we take on? How much change, how much risk and change can an organization deal with? And don't sign up for 400% or whatever is outside of your boundaries.
Right.
Maybe push it a little bit, but that's a popular concept right now.
Yeah, it also gives development teams a way of showing, management they don't understand necessarily why you can't transform everything overnight or over the weekend.
All at once.
Yeah. So these sort of risk management and insights into the risk of change helps to plot out, what are we going to do tomorrow and how are we going to do it, as opposed to change everything now. Monday morning, 7 a.m., I expect everything to be different. It's like, well, actually, if we look at the potential problems of changing things, it's going to be a huge issue. At the same point, it does allow you to change. So, for many years, and it's still sort of the case, retailers won't change anything between Thanksgiving and New Year's. But if you can, but in today's world, you have to improve applications and customer experience and things. So it helps you move carefully and deliberately, as opposed to just sort of rushing forward and or not moving because you're afraid of breaking things.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of that within our customer base. That wasn't traditional, it was more in-store purchase type, you know, companies. When the pandemic happened, they had to switch gears, or else you make no money. So at the end of the day, we saw a lot of that as well, very early on in the pandemic, and they had to take that leap, and having those guideposts within the analytics and AI solution that we have gave them the understanding that it'll be okay. Like when we make all of these changes, like it will be okay. So they had a level of confidence, whereas before, historically, they were like, that's a bad idea. So they had a much more data, so they had that higher level of confidence to move forward with the changes. One thing that popped into my head as I was talking there, not to overuse the word, but I think AI and analytics also allows us to do the agility piece, and not the agile agility, right? Like it's being agile and being able to turn on a dime and transition and iterate and all of those things that we see organizations do. I think, again, having that level of confidence in the data, making sure that that data is pointing me in the right direction for a better decision, you can then make faster, better decisions as you're going through, making you a much more agile organization. From IT all the way through to the business, right? Supporting what the business need is. And IT can now have that level of confidence that, hey, yeah, we can go faster than we could in the past.
Yeah, and some of it also comes down to corporate culture. I mean, some CIOs and IT leaders are afraid to push change because they'll talk about change, but at the end of the day, their job is dependent on keeping the lights on rather than disrupting everything. So
Correct.
they have tools that can allow them to safely change that's helpful.
Yeah, we do have to keep the lights on, but I think IT or software in general, because it's not just IT doing this, has certainly moved from the background to the forefront in many cases.
Absolutely.
So I just want to remind everyone in the handouts section on your user interface on the browser, if you click that little handouts, I think there's a red dot up there. You can download the document that we're discussing today, and some of this data. We'll also email that to you as a follow-up to you and everyone that registered. So we were talking about, and Neil points out, some of the DORA metrics seem like they're maybe more oriented towards leadership, where engineering kind of starts at the developer velocity, bottom up. I know one of the things that when I first started getting into DevOps and also in cloud is, the frequency of release. How often do you do releases? And since then, I hear a lot of good advice. You don't have to be Google. You don't have to be Netflix. Everybody's organization, your organization may not be able to handle deploying, 25 deploys an hour or whatever, some number. But it is interesting because we have a stat here from your research, Dan, sharing around how often do you release new software features, not just bug fixes, but that's also an interesting stat. And it's not like everybody's doing it every day, releasing every day.
Right.
8% is pretty healthy too, but a lot of folks are in that 38% category of weekly. Dan, I guess maybe not surprised is a little too strong, but I was pleased to see that organizations are releasing software that frequent. If you're a product manager sitting here saying, I got to get to market, when am I going to get that new feature in our product, our digital experience to a customer? I don't have to wait to the end of the quarter all the time.
Yeah. Frequency of release of new features is important, but I think companies have actually sort of slowed down a little bit. I know even Facebook, for instance, does it once a week because it's just too much to do in a controlled manner, to understand the risks, how it's going to impact customers. So I think companies are trying to figure out, what's the right cadence for our customers. Also, if you think about, SaaS offerings, for example, you can't constantly be changing the way the system looks and feels for customers. They get used to a certain navigation and the button for a certain task might not be optimally placed, but they know where it is. And so if you're doing constant change, you can sort of derail the usability of different applications.
I'm curious your experience in this, Tina, as well. Is this a heavy concentration of organizations of we got to pump up the number of releases, or is that something you're kind of evolving over time? As we can't push that on our users or on our customers that frequent, or maybe we're just not ready. We're not set to handle it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because even there are customers that I think are set up to potentially do daily, but like you said, they know who their user community is, and they don't, how big is a big change, right? That you're going to introduce, or maybe a new UI, etc. You got to think about, is it an external app or is it an internal app? I think that you see varying differences, right? So like some companies say, oh, well, if it's an external app, maybe we'll not release as quite as often as I would like, even though technically I could, but they really want to make sure that the user experience, because there's such a heavy nowadays, because of the technologies that we have, a heavy emphasis on that kind of user experience and customer experience, that may not allow IT to go as fast as maybe that they're ready to do, just based on those two components.
User experience is a good one. I mean, just one that we can all relate to.
Exactly. We're all users of software, right?
Well, yeah, I had to update my browser before we started today. Every time I went to check my mail on my phone, I had to update the app. Okay,
exactly.
Nuts. I mean, there is a balance in
and there's so much competition in some cases on different ways that on different browsers or different apps that do the same thing, that they worry about the customer loyalty, because it's really easy to bump off of one and perhaps move to another, especially on those external apps, external facing ones. So I do think that that's more and more looked at. Sorry, Dan.
No, sorry. No, I also wouldn't separate internal and external apps too much. I think we some of us are used to using really slow and convoluted internal apps.
That's true.
No, you
fair enough.
Don't
fair
say
enough.
really.
But I don't want to admit that, but okay.
Like Gen Z and millennials are making up a huge portion of the workforce, and they I know it drives technology organizations crazy, but they'll say, why doesn't this work like Google? Why doesn't this work like Facebook? Mm-hmm. And their expectations are so incredibly high that internal technology teams need to give a consumer-like experience for employees and for partners, so it is sort of a new approach to internal apps, that you really gotta treat your partners and employees as if they are customers also.
No, I agree. I agree to a certain extent, because again, really they don't have the power to bounce to a different application if they're frustrated by it. But you'll definitely hear on those internal apps sort of what their problems are. Like, why can't you be easy like this? I think that is that the sort of younger generation, because they grew up with all this technology, that maybe some of us haven't or didn't grow up with it, and we kind of learned to enjoy it as we came through our lives. But at the end of the day, I think that everybody needs to be conscious of that, because they are the up and coming users of everything that we're doing here, especially in DevOps, as they graduate and they come in and they're looking at software development. I don't know what happened there. I kind of got, sorry about that. There I am. I was a little fuzzy there for a second. I know, it's like, what happened to me? I got a little fuzzy. But no, I think that we need to all listen to that generational, and what they think and how powerful and how fast they want things to go in those user experiences, because they will be the ones that will be purchasing all the software soon, if not already.
It's interesting too, because I've heard both sides of the argument. Like, oh, you're releasing so frequently, you must have a lot of bugs. And I've also heard, oh, You're releasing frequently, you've got a lot of new stuff coming out. That's great. I like that. And it seems like this weekly frequency is one a lot of folks have starting to standardize on. That may shift over time, but we're doing our normal releases of bug fixes, security fixes, and new features, on a regular basis. And provided it's not at 11 a.m. on Monday every week, do it on a Saturday or Sunday or something. It seems to be a way we're kind of settling into this frequency. Quite a question.
Yeah. Larger enterprises likely wouldn't. I think the smaller sort of cloud native, businesses will kind of go into that mix. I think again, there's that hesitation, a little bit of change, and will my users bounce if they don't like what I rolled out?
Yeah,
I mean, I do like even like a monthly release cycle, because the changes aren't as large, meaning they're like small bits. As a marketer, it kind of stinks to have to go out there and say, oh, well, see, I added this little flag, or I added this, because it's not that exciting when you're releasing on a monthly basis. But the accumulation of those months, say over 4, 5, 6 months, it becomes a huge value add. And it's almost, a lot of times it's a little transparent if they're releasing at that level until that 4th or 5th month when the feature is now fully functional.
Dan, there's a really interesting running dialogue in chat, primarily between Neil and Sylvia. And if I could summarize it this way, it's kind of, there's a maturity level of an organization where the metrics start to make more sense. And that's difficult to do when you're a smaller size. And I think it was maybe Neil that also brought up and it's also consistently, I mean, don't do the whack-a-mole management shiny object thing where every week it's a different metric. We never know what direction we're going. So there is a discipline and a maturity and an engineering sort of mentality to this. It's not just fad of the month management stuff, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
And I mean, a lot of it is, what's your business problem? What's the development problem? And start with that. So, even today we've talked about a couple of Digital.ai's offerings, but you can't sort of swallow it all. So instead it's, figure out what is, what's keeping your teams up at night. If you could change one thing, what would it be? And then really focus on that. And then, use that as sort of a test case in terms of, if you're able to be successful with that, let's move faster and roll things out more quickly.
Very cool. There's as a kind of getting close to the end of our time here together, there was a really great conversation earlier. And press pause. By the way, for our next webinar, I vote we have Neil and Sylvia come on camera, and
let's bring them.
We're going to jump into chat. We'll comment.
We'll pull them right in.
You two rock stars can do the next one for us. I think it was, I don't remember who brought this up about kind of where do you get started, right? It's, someone says just pick a place and get started, but how do you get going down this path of metrics where you don't feel like you're changing your mind every second because, well, that's not the wrong rock. That's not the right metric. Go get a different rock. Oh, that's the wrong one. How do you do this in a way where you can introduce it and build confidence in both the process and what the data is telling you? Tina, I'm curious your experience with, product and market and customers and also your career experience.
Yeah, I'm going to pull from, my pure DevOps experience here, because I'll look at, from a DevOps life cycle perspective, plan, build, blah, blah, right? I would take the component. So if I'd take your plan and I would say, what are my problems and challenges in the planning phase? And I would start there. Where do I see the most amount of stumbling blocks or things that are getting hung up to get me to my next phase of build? And I'd start with those lines of questions in each of those components down there. And I would, identify the problems and then just simply say, all right, so next go round, let's start to measure X, Y, and Z in plan and in build and in test and in monitor and in, release and deploy, whatever component you're looking at. there's problems in each of those areas. I guarantee it. No one's perfect. It's always an iterative process to make it more efficient, make it go faster, make it all of those things. But don't get hung up on, oh, I got to measure this particular metric or KPI. It's really, I just say, fundamentally speak to one another in the problems and challenges you're having in that particular area, and then come up with identify what you think is good, what is success, and then watch it flow through that cycle and figure out, did you hit that success and were you successful? Maybe your definition of success before you started wasn't, was perfect, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was, oh, well, I guess I could have moved that metric up, if you will, or that KPI up. But I think speaking about metrics in the most simplistic form, like a conversational metric, and identifying it before you start and then measuring it after you're done. I think that's the best way to get a good understanding of just metrics in general. I know that was a pretty overarching kind of discussion, but that's kind of where I would start from my perspective. And each one would obviously have its own little nuances, but that's where I would go.
Dan, why don't you jump in? I'd love to hear your
thoughts. I think part of it is even stepping back in the process even earlier and figuring out, you understand where you want to improve and the metrics you want to extract, but figuring out what sort of data do you have to figure out what those metrics are. So, it's great to measure X, Y, and Z, but do you have the data to be able to do that? Do you understand what data you have?
And maybe that's the question you ask. Do I have the data?
Yeah.
Like in the plan phase,
do something
I
that's
have
doable.
the data to measure it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I get it if I don't? I think that's a really good point, Dan.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to it, just from my experience, often people will say, pick a couple, right? Don't pick 12 metrics that we're going to measure. Pick 1, 2, or 3. Start out simple, but pick what's meaningful. And another is, it doesn't have to be just the metrics. It's about a continuous improvement, continuous learning process. Because just to pick from the quality world, rarely does one thing change the quality drastically of a product with a lot of little improvements. And then sometimes you have a breakthrough, but it's the accumulation of those steps. So you can apply something like we talk about in the DevOps world, the theory of constraints, bottleneck that you mentioned, Tina. There's a theory of don't work on improving what's before the bottleneck, because it just makes the bottleneck more bottlenecked, and don't work on what's after it, because it starves for work, because the bottleneck's holding it all up. So work on the bottleneck, then guess what? The bottleneck moves. As soon as you work on it, then go to the next place. And if you tie that to your metrics, that way you can say overall, all right, we're fixing problems, but is that making the whole system, the whole way of delivering software better? And how do we measure that? So I don't know what you all think about that. That's, sort of a quick summary of a few things I've learned over a few great.
No, I totally agree with you on that, especially in the testing world, right? I think that is, it's key, right? Because you're right. Because like one small change isn't going to drastically change the output on quality tests. So no, I totally agree with you on that.
And any parting thoughts before we wrap things up?
You want to go first, Tina, or do you want me to?
No, I think I'll give you all a call to action. Thank you so much for the time today. I'm super appreciative of, the ability to do this survey and get the number and the volume of respondents that we got. It means that people are really looking at this area that we kind of took a dive into. Like to see maybe a part 2 or a part 3, just to get a little bit more level of detail. But I think this was a really great start. I'd urge everybody to go to Digital.ai and look for our analytics and AI capabilities. We have lots of webinars and demos that are available to you as well. Not a hard sell here, but I think it's such a fun way to actually have these predictive insights already kind of packaged together that sit up on top, no matter what you have underneath, no matter what tools or solutions, because we have integrations into all of those data points to give you that holistic view. And that's kind of where I would go from there. And you both, thank you for, allowing me to attend this webinar. I do appreciate that.
Oh, are you kidding me? You couldn't have done it without you. You're fantastic.
Thanks.
Dan, your wrap-up thoughts?
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation. And so, a lot of what we're seeing is we're in early days of ML and AI for DevOps. I mean, there's no shortage of people talking about it. But I mean, what Digital.ai is doing and other vendors are doing is simplifying the process so that you don't need to go get data scientists and internal teams to sort of build from scratch. And
you don't have to build your own data lake.
Right. Your data science team is already too busy, or you don't have a data science team.
True.
And so you need easy ways of accessing predictive analytics and ML, and I think that's where a lot of the focus is on.
Excellent. Wonderful. And definitely check out Digital.ai, our sponsors of today's webinar. Kudos also to you, Tina. Not every marketing person can have the conversation about it without giving you the whole marketing pitch. So,
I tried to scale that back, but I have been in and around this space for quite a while, so it's been a fun ride for me.
Well,
so I enjoyed
that truly shows. You know your stuff, no doubt. We want to say a big thanks to Neil and Sylvia and everyone else that jumped in with comments.
Absolutely. That was fun. I love that part.
It's what makes this enjoyable. And we hope you like this format. We get a lot of good feedback about you didn't have to listen to yet another product pitch. I know I can hear that, but I want to hear people talking about the problem space and what I can learn from their experiences or some ideas or some good takeaways. And I hope that everybody's gotten that from today. So speaking of takeaways, we have some gift cards to give away. Cody J. Brown, come back on. Let's hit it out of the park with some gift cards, man.
Awesome. Well, we have 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give away. Our first winner is Luciano M. Our second winner is Milind M. Our third winner is Nicholas L. And our fourth and final winner is Dino C. So please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see an email, just check your spam folder. Tina,
Excellent.
Dan, and Mitch, thank you all so much for being here with us today.
Hey, one point of privilege. I'm going to pull executive privilege, and we're sending a gift card on my dime to Neil and to Sylvia too. Thank you.
Awesome.
Fun. Do that.
Thanks, Cody, for letting me jump in there. Let you wrap up.
Absolutely. Sure thing. So Tan, Tina, Mitch, thank you all so much for joining me today. I would like to thank the Techstrong Research team for compiling the research for the pulse meter, and I'd also like to thank Digital.ai for sponsoring this webinar. Quick reminder to our audience that the session was recorded. Following the panel, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. And of course,
Digital.ai. Yes.
And my final thanks, of course, and as always, goes to you, our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please take one extra moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.